Dr. Abdelaziz Rantisi, one of the co-founders of Hamas, who I knew, who was assassinated in 2004 with his son by the Israelis, and he was in Han Yunis in 1956. He was a 10-year-old boy, and he watched the Israelis line up hundreds of people against the wall, including his uncle, and execute them. And that set him on a life of armed, militant resistance against the Zionists.
It's death, either by killing or by cancer, by Apache or by cardiac arrest. I prefer to be by Apache.
I used to argue with him about suicide bombings. This was when suicide bombings were happening in Jerusalem and other places, which I covered. I was there. And he would always answer me with statistics. He was a doctor, graduated first in his class from the University of Alexandria. I mean, he was extremely intelligent and well-spoken. He seemed incapable of grappling with the moral dimensions of suicide bombing, which I found frustrating. And my argument to him was that he was surrendering the moral superiority of the Palestinian cause by engaging in indiscriminate killing of civilians. Yeah. And you brought up October 7th and linked it to trauma. We have to acknowledge that on October 7th there were atrocities that were clearly committed by armed Palestinian factions, not systematic rape, not beheading of babies. This was all Hasbara, Israeli propaganda, but there were real atrocities.
Well, a couple of things come to mind. One is there was a very famous leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
You're talking about Mark Edelman.
That's right. And Mark Edelman was the second in command and became the first in command of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Needless to say, nobody talks about him in Israel because he was a supporter of Palestinian freedom. But he would criticize the Palestinian resistance for their bombings of, the suicide bombings and their attacks on civilians. So he could make a distinction between the justness of their cause and the inhumanity of some of their methods. The other doctor that comes into mind is a Palestinian psychiatrist, Sarraj, who talked about these children who watched their parents being incapable of protecting them, and their parents being humiliated by the Israeli soldiers, which the Israeli army is, they just humiliate parents in front of their kids, so that these kids then gravitate towards a movement that says, we're going to fight back. So you're going to stand the appeal to these kids whose parents are powerless to support a force that at least says, we're going to fight back no matter what. Something happens in their hearts get shut down. When your heart is closed, you don't see the humanity of the other. And this has happened in a big way in Israel now. No matter how we look at it, there are some horrible things that were done by the Palestinians on October the 7th because they were full of hate, because they were so traumatized. But if you look at the Washington Post yesterday, had an article showing the videos shared by Israeli soldiers. And you've seen some of this.
למרות ה-7 באוקטובר, אנחנו מוכנים לדבר על סולחה, שיקום הרצועה.
The viciousness, the vindictiveness, the hatred, the inhumanity. And these are people who had not been traumatized in the same ways that the Palestinians had been. The event in Amsterdam a few weeks ago, what the Western press did not report is one of these soccer hooligans from the Maccabi football team, soccer team, who have been notoriously racist for ever. The night before the so-called pogrom, what they were chanting, you know what they were chanting in Amsterdam? There are no schools in Palestine because we've killed all the kids. And they were chanting this with glee, not justifying anything, but if the Israelis, who haven't suffered anything compared to what the Palestinians have suffered, in fact, they've perpetrated it, if their hearts can be so embittered and closed and shut, can we understand why some of the Palestinians might have responded the same way? I'm not favoring it, I'm not justifying it. I'm saying is the doctor you were talking to who could not get your logic on the inhumanity of suicide bombings, his heart was closed. And that's a trauma response.